Hey, MCARBO brother, I'm Chris Nelson, President of MCARBO. Really excited to introduce new CZ Scorpion EVO 3 trigger spring kit for your CZ Scorpion, whether it be the pistol, the carbine, or the micro pistol. We got them all covered. The S1, the S2, it's all covered. This kit will work for all of those. Really excited about this kit. Took it down from 8 pounds to 4.5 pounds, nearly a 45% trigger pull reduction. There was a lot of room here in this CZ right off the shelf. 8-pound trigger. We had to get you down to something more competitive. 4.5 pounds. Man, this is so much cleaner, smoother. It's going to be much more reliable, much more accurate. Really going to get all the performance you can out of this CZ Scorpion. Really love this. Let's get on over tabletop, show you what we did. Parts and tools needed for this build: the CZ Scorpion EVO 3 trigger spring kit by MCARBO. It includes a lighter trigger return spring, a lighter disconnector spring, and it's also got a very thin 3/1000ths of an inch shim for that firing pin block lever to make sure that it's completely off of that trigger housing. That's something that a lot of guys have had issues with, is that arm rubbing on the housing wall, which can be a huge problem, obviously, if there's major interference there. This kit, the CZ Scorpion EVO 3 kit, will work for the carbine version or the pistol version. It'll work for the S1 and the S2 model, so you're covered. Works for all of them. Synthetic grease with PTFE, excellent choice for any of those constant wear areas. There's definitely some inside, and we'll look at that. Also a great way to do some of the install. When we're placing that 3/1000ths of an inch shim, we're going to use that almost like glue. It works perfectly to hold it in place. 1.5 millimeter Allen key, 3 millimeter Allen key, 1/16 inch punch, 3/32 inch punch, 1/8 inch punch, hammer, bench block. And as always, guys, make sure you're wearing iPro. Before we get started, let's go ahead and take this opportunity together. Check our firearms, make sure they're clear. Check the chamber, check the bolt face, check the magazine well. This firearm's clear. Let's see what kind of factory trigger pull we're starting with. 8 pounds, 1.1 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 8 pounds, 2.7 ounces. All right, so we get started by turning our carbines upright. We want to remove this screw right here that holds the trigger mechanism in place. So we'll get them upright, take our 3 millimeter Allen key, and we'll insert it through that hole in the trigger guard. It's going to allow us to actually break that screw loose and remove it. All right, there's a screw there. We can set that aside. Now we'll just take our 1/8 inch punch and we'll push out that takedown lever all the way through the other side. Now we need to make sure we have the bolt locked back. Go ahead and charge the bolt, lock it back. Now we'll be able to pull up and out on the trigger mechanism. Grab a hold of the magazine well like this and pull up and forward. It comes out just like that. All right, we're going to focus on the trigger mechanism. Go ahead and let your bolt forward. We can set the barrel and receiver group aside. All right, so let's do a quick little review on the trigger mechanism now. So we've got our ejector up here. Now our safety back here, I've got it on safe right now. So if I rotate it back, it's on fire, forward, safe. All right, so we leave it on fire. We're going to need that for the disassembly anyway. And just take a look at this trigger mechanism and how it all functions. So you'll see the hammer right here, and when you pull the trigger, you'll see these little feet up here on the side of the hammer that move forward. So notice, see them moving forward? So there's a high engagement area right there. That's metal on metal contact just grinding. And you'll be able to see here in a second when we let that hammer go forward, you can see that ton of wear on each tab, both sides of the hammer. So what we're going to do is put some synthetic grease with PTFE there. It's going to help slicken it up, make it feel less gritty, nice smooth trigger pull. That's what we're all about. Want to make sure we get a nice, even trigger pull reduction and a smooth trigger pull. This is the firing pin block lever right here. So this is where the shim's going to go in between the lever and the actual trigger housing. These two pieces of metal will typically rub together. Now that's just a safeguard to make sure there's no issue. Some don't have it, some do, but just to be on the safe side, we're going to put that shim in there because you wouldn't want that dragging. That's going to increase your trigger pull weight. All of these items hinge on the trigger return spring down here. So the trigger return spring is right in here, and then you can see this item in the middle is your disconnector. So you got your disconnector spring right there, and then the rest is pretty straightforward. This is your sear trigger housing, so it's all engaging and interacting with that trigger pull. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this. So when we start, we need to get a 1.5 inch Allen key. We're going to remove the set screw on this side. So on the right side, take your 1.5 inch Allen key, and we're going to remove the set screw on that safety lever. All right, there's a set screw right there. Definitely under a lot of Loctite from the factory, so if you want to put some blue 242 Loctite on there, that'd be a great idea. Go ahead and pull off the safety lever. All right, just like that. And you'll notice here, upon reassembly, this is something we're going to have to manipulate to get it all in place. You'll notice we want to make sure we get that little point there on the trigger housing to locate into that notch on the pin. You can see this is the rearward notch. We want the forward notch. And then you can see there's a little detent down there that's got to compress as well. Just simple stuff we'll cover again in a second. So we just push it right out. Just kind of wiggle the whole lever system out. Set that down. All right, so now it's just a matter of getting the trigger mechanism out of the housing. So what we'll do is initially just kind of pulling the trigger to get it to kind of wiggle itself out, but then you want to pull it straight up and out. So you'll have to kind of hold it all together because it's a straight up and out fit. Just like that. All right, so there's the housing. So we can set that aside. So we'll get started with the trigger mechanism disassembly. There's 2 pins, one up here, one back here. Hammer hinge pin, trigger hinge pin. So the hammer hinge pin controls the hammer spring, the hammer, and you can see the firing pin block lever over here. They're all on the same pin. And you'll also notice down here the hammer spring locates up under the trigger return spring here. And also that firing pin block lever locates in the trigger mechanism housing. So the trigger mechanism housing also kind of works like a sear. You'll see here in a second, we'll lock this hammer back and you'll notice how it locks right in place. And you can see those tabs on either side of the hammer, how they basically act like a sear, because when you pull on that trigger, you can see them moving forward there, and then it snaps loose. So that's what's locating, that firing pin block lever is locating into that trigger housing, sear, whatever you want to call it. Works much like it. Really unique assembly, really cool design. So we're going to go into it first, the hammer hinge pin. Let's do that. So we'll push out from this side here, the opposite side of the firing pin block lever. So we'll push out 1/8 inch punch. All right, pushing that pin out, it's the largest pin. So there it is. We'll set that down. Back out our punch, take a look at everything as we pull it out. So there's the hammer. All right, it locates forward to that hammer spring, just like that. All right. See the strike face back here. And you'll notice the strike face, it's always going to be a little marked up. Set that down. All right, and then we got our hammer spring here, which the legs locate on this side under that trigger return spring. You can see a little better now. All right, so we're going to pull out that hammer spring, just like that. And then you'll notice the firing pin block lever, how it locates down in that trigger housing, right there in that tab, that cutout. And the trigger return spring is captured under the firing pin block lever. And that shim is going to go right in here, in between the housing and the firing pin block lever, right in this space right here. So when we reassemble it, you'll notice that. We're going to also lube it up a little bit, because if you look closely, on the housing itself, there's some wear marks. And that's from that bar rubbing against the housing. That's from the housing not necessarily being 100% 90. You know, these two parts having interference and creating drag and somewhat of a nasty trigger pull. So that's something we're going to address and clean up. So we'll set this firing pin block lever down. All right, all that's remaining now is that trigger hinge pin. Take our 3/32 inch punch and we'll push these out. So push the same side, pushing out, taking a look at everything. There's our trigger hinge pin right there. We'll set that down. And then you can see the rest of the components inside. They'll all kind of quickly fall apart as we pull it out. But you know, one thing you'll notice, this long leg of the trigger return spring will be positioned like that. So it's going to be on top. Short leg's going to be on the bottom, pressing against the housing. And you can see your disconnector right here. And that disconnector spring. All right. And then you got your trigger spacer in here, and that's it. And then the trigger housing, which has these 2 sear tabs more or less. So we'll pull out the punch, and everything kind of flops out of the way just like that. But no big deal. We're going to go over it again upon reassembly. Just going to point out the disconnector, how it has that little notch there for the disconnector spring back here, which we are replacing. And that disconnector spring fits in that hole right there. And that's it. Pretty straightforward. So there's a disconnector. We'll set that down. And the disconnector spring back here, we'll set that down. And then this trigger spacer right here, we're going to set that down. There's the factory trigger return spring there. And then the trigger just comes right out just like that, and then an empty housing. All right. All right, first thing, we're going to take synthetic grease and PTFE. Yeah, I just don't want to forget as I get moving along. Just go ahead and lube these 2 little engagement surfaces that kind of look like hooks right there in the trigger housing. That's what acts like the sear. It's going to be dragging across that metal on the hammer. So we go ahead and lube that, and then we'll grab the hammer and do the same. You can quickly spot, here's the strike face, and then here's those engagement surfaces right here. You'll probably notice that there's a little bit of scratch and wear on both of those surfaces. So you want to make sure we coat them up good. It'll aid in a smoother feeling trigger pull, so that's always nice. So we got those coated, all right? And then what we'll do is we're going to grab our firing pin block lever, and we're going to coat the outside here. That's what's engaging between the housing. All right, so we got that side coated. Set that down, coming right back to it here in a second. A little more grease. And we're gonna coat this side of the housing as well. You can see those wear marks there. That's from that lever grinding against the housing. So we're just put a little bit of grease on there. Might have went a little overkill, but put as much or as little as you like. It's just a matter of putting a little bit of lubricity on there. We don't want to have it so saturated that it's just oozing out, but we want to make sure it's lubricated. It's going to aid in the function. So then we'll take our little case right here. All right, so in the blue container here in the kit, we've got the shim. So 2 shims, one bigger, one smaller. All right, the bigger one is the firing pin block lever shim, but it's very thin. All right, so that's just enough clearance we need to separate that firing pin block lever from the side of the housing. Makes all the world of difference, preventing any kind of drag or anything like that. And then this is a trigger hinge pin shim. Now we had to go with a shim because we went with a smaller diameter wire for that trigger return spring, which you change one thing, it changes another. We want to make sure obviously that that spring didn't come undone from the lever, so that is a must. You have to have that with this kit. If you're going to go with the smaller wire diameter spring, you got to make sure you take up that extra space, which now exists because when they designed it to be with that spring. So always trying to cover everything when we put our kits together. So this is one thing in particular that is a absolute must, the shim for that trigger hinge pin. Smaller wire, more gap, more problems, it's corrected. So that's good. So we're ready to go ahead and put everything in. All right, so we start the reassembly of the trigger mechanism. This side here has got a big cutout, right? And then you can see this special features over here on the opposite side. This is the side that's facing us. So we'll take a little synthetic grease PTFE, we'll put it over there on that opposite side, over that little tiny hole where the trigger hinge pin is going to locate. And we'll take that trigger shim from the kit. That's what's going to provide the necessary offset to keep that trigger return spring in line. So we put that shim right there, all right? Take our trigger and housing, we're going to drop it right into trigger mechanism housing. All right, so it's located in place. Now we'll take our lighter custom disconnector spring from the kit, put a little drop of synthetic grease on the end of it there. That's going to help keep it located inside that pocket, this pocket right here on the housing, on the trigger housing. All right, so the disconnector spring's in place, the shim's in place. Now we'll take our trigger hinge pin, we'll get it started on this side right here, help keep that initial alignment. Then we'll take our trigger spacer, all right, I'm gonna just roll it on in there, get the hinge pin through it. Okay, good. Make sure that pin's not sticking all the way through that little spacer because we want to be able to drop in the disconnector next. So you can see that little cutout there for the disconnector spring, all right, and the disconnector is going to face forward like this, that little hook facing forward, same direction as the trigger. So we want to make sure we drop the disconnector over that spring and let it capture in that pocket. And it helps if you push down on the back side of the disconnector just like that and then push through with the trigger hinge pin. All right, so now we start lining everything up, compressing, kind of wiggling a little bit so we can get that pin all the way through. Should be able to push it through by hand. And it helps you kind of feel your way through it. But you can also push down on the table, give it a little bit of an assist in case it kind of snags up on you like that. All right, so you can see it pressed all the way against that shim there. We need to back it out just a hair so we can get that trigger return spring in place. So I'm just kind of pulling back on it just a hair so we can open up that gap. All right, so we grab our lighter trigger return spring. We're just going to drop it right in. Just want to make sure we get the coils located first. All right, that little short leg is going to go on the floor. So we drop it right in, just like that. Now we're going to go ahead and push through on the hinge pin. And it helps if you push up on that trigger from the bottom because that'll get your vertical alignment right where you need it. All right, and then press it all in, make sure it's good and flush on both sides. Make sure everything's captured. So you can see this trigger return spring's captured, so is the shim. All right, we're pretty much good at this point. So one major component of this trigger mechanism is back in order. Now we'll grab our firing pin block lever. All right, we need to get this to locate. So we need to get the lever to locate on that trigger return spring. So if you take your 1/8 inch punch, and you push down on that trigger return spring, and you also want to position the lever in your hand like this. Make sure you got the shim on the back side, but position the lever in your hand like this, kind of pinch it, and you're going to push down Just kind of set it down on the table, give yourself a little leverage. We're not pushing too hard to break the trigger or anything like that, but it is plastic, so be a little careful. All right, so we're going to push down that trigger return spring, and then we're going to push down with the actual lever itself, firing pin block lever, and get it to locate right there in that pocket. So it's kind of real quick and easy how you do it. You know, you're just simply compressing with the punch, and then you're picking it up the rest of the way there with the actual lever, and then once the lever lines up with the pocket, you just drop it right in like so. All right, so it's good and captured. You won't have to keep a ton of tension on at this point. You know, you can pretty much take your hands off, but I wouldn't. Just keep a little bit of pressure right there. We want to go ahead and get the rest of it in order. That's definitely the hardest part, so if you got that, man, you're golden. All right, take one of your smaller punches, it's got the little 1/16. I'm just gonna kind of make sure that shim is lined up. Get that pin started through. Just helps to kind of use it as a guide at this point. You know, and also insurance that we don't lose our footing there in the trigger housing with the firing pin block lever. All right, so it's nice and flush, just kind of sitting right there like that. We're about ready to drop in our hammer spring. So we'll grab our hammer spring, all right? Got the little loop up top here, and those little legs there at the bottom. Those legs are gonna have to be in the same position as previous. So we wanna get the coils lined up with the pin. We wanna make sure those legs are underneath, or this leg in particular is underneath the trigger return spring. The other leg's just gonna sit over here, but this leg is going to sit under that trigger return spring there. All right, and they're pretty much lined up with that hinge pin. All right, then we're gonna take our hammer. This is a strike face right here, so we wanna make sure that's facing forward towards the front. Same position as the trigger, all right, because it's gonna lock back and slam forward. So we made sure we put grease on these little tabs back here because that's an engagement area. So we're gonna get our hammer situated just like this, and then we're gonna line it all up. And that little loop will rest right there on that ledge on the hammer as well. And what we'll do is we'll just push down the table and kind of look through as we're pushing down, getting everything lined up. And you can use a punch as a guide as well. But it always helps to be able to look down through it and see what you're doing, just like that. All right, so everything is in there. So we are ready to go ahead and drop this mechanism back into the housing, put the rest of the firearm back together. All right, so now we're gonna put the rest of it back together. You got your trigger guard magwell assembly, you got your safety lever attached to the post, and the other lever and the set screw over here, and then you've got your other screw that's gonna locate through the polymer housing and locate into the trigger mechanism, keeping it all in place. Let's go ahead and put this together. All right, so we're gonna take our trigger mechanism, it's all reassembled. We're gonna drop it right in place, just drop straight in. You might have to wiggle it a little bit, but you wanna make sure it gets completely seated all the way in. All right, now we're gonna hold it, take the trigger mechanism screw that's gonna require that 3mm Allen key. All right, get it started by hand. All right, then take your 3mm Allen key, go right through that handy little hole in the trigger guard. I like that idea. All right, snug it up real good. Good, all right. Now we can just kind of test the operation here. Awesome. All right, good. So now we can go ahead and put the safety in. So what we've got here is the safety lever, right? We've got one lever attached already. Got the post here. We're gonna stick it all the way through. Pretty straightforward till we get to about here. Now it's not a big deal. It just takes a little finesse. So we wanna get it just like where we had initially on this forward notch up here. So we're almost there. Just kind of turn it a little bit. And you're just gonna press it into place. And you'll know it'll snap just like that. All right, and that little detent popped right into this channel down here, and then we got it into that forward notch, so we're good. So what we'll do now is take the lever, and the cool thing is there's no way to mess it up. You got threads right here on the post, you got a hole right here in the lever, so you just push the lever over, and then we're gonna take our set screw, throw some Loctite on it, and just screw it right in. And the levers are pointing the same direction. So let's grab a little 242 Loctite, put a little dab of removable blue 242 Loctite on those threads. And we're gonna go ahead and put the set screw right in, tighten it right up. Make sure it's good and snug. Wipe off any excess. All right, we can test the lever function. Everything's moving, rotating as it should. All right, good to go. So now we can go ahead and put the complete trigger housing back into the receiver. All right, so now that the trigger assembly is all put back together, we want to put the trigger assembly back into the receiver. So what we want to do is lock the bolt back, turn it upright, make sure the takedown pin is out like this, and then we're going to drop in the back side of the trigger mechanism with the safety levers. We'll get this trigger guard here into the notch on the pistol grip, and get the safety levers to locate in place, and then this portion up front will line right up, press down, push in on the takedown pin, and we're all set. We're all back together. Let's do a quick function check. Let's go ahead and place it on fire, pull the trigger. Nice. Keep it depressed, pull back on it. Want to hear that reset? There we go. Whew, that feels good. All right, let's check that safety real quick. All right, safety works. Pull that trigger one more time. Oh man, that is much more like it. That feels outstanding. Let's measure this trigger pull. Oh yeah. Let's see what kind of modified trigger pull we got. 4 pounds, 8.2 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. Four pounds, 5.1 ounces. Well, there you have it, guys. A night and day effect. Just can't beat the way this trigger feels now. Brakes smooth, brakes clean, feels exactly like what you'd expect from the factory. 4.5 pound trigger right there in that sweet spot. If you're gonna be competing with the Scorpion, this is definitely the way to go, man. There's no sense having that huge lawyer trigger pull on your CZ Scorpion, especially if you're gonna be competing and doing some stuff that requires some shooting and moving. You know, you gotta get that heart rate down, you gotta try to get accurate rounds on target, so you need every advantage you can get. Last thing you wanna be doing is high heart rate, running and gunning, you're like squeezing the trigger and you're shaking. A great way to get a little more competitive edge out there when you're competing or just having fun. What's the sense in shooting a really stiff trigger? This is so much cleaner. I can't wait to see what kind of results you guys get. Post your results in the YouTube comments. Give us a like or subscribe. We always appreciate that. Thank you, MCARBO Brother, for your ideas and your support. As always, happy shooting.